I've seen many humanitarian disasters in the world, but I have never seen climate carnage on this scale.
Historic monsoon rain has left nearly a third of Pakistan underwater. The flooding has damaged nearly all of the country's crops, leaving the country facing a food shortage. I recently spoke to Sarah Charles. She's the assistant to the administrator of USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance about their efforts to help. You recently visited Pakistan with Administrator Samantha Power. Can you describe the reality of what people are facing there?
Yes, I just got back last week. I traveled with Administrator Power to Pakistan, to Karachi, flyover of Sindh, one of the most affected provinces in Pakistan, as well as meetings with government officials in Islamabad. I think what your guests are seeing right now is water as far as the eye can see, really historic levels of flooding in Pakistan. We often think about this in contrast to flooding in Pakistan in 2010, where we saw rapid onset, very severe flooding, what they call in Pakistan riverine flooding. But in some ways, this is even more severe because the water is affecting areas that aren't used to that kind of flooding, standing water that could be there really for not just weeks, but months, impacting really the one of the most productive agricultural areas of Pakistan. So we have both the immediate impacts of the flooding, people displaced, even still living in some cases in standing water, but also what we see are likely long-term impacts as the country's cotton crop, the country's wheat crop has been devastated by this flooding.
So the U.S. has pledged an additional $30 million in aid. Break that down for us. What will those funds be used for?
So Mimi, we actually have now pledged $50 million in assistance. So $30 million a couple of weeks ago. And then when I was in Pakistan last week, we announced an additional 20 million, bringing our total support to over 50 million for the victims of flooding in Pakistan. This will provide and is already starting to provide the kinds of shelter material and tarps that you see being unloaded by U.S. military planes right there, emergency supplies that were flying in from Dubai, but also cash, food, and food assistance to help people that are displaced right now with their immediate needs. And also, as we look towards the coming days and weeks, we're increasingly concerned in Pakistan about disease impacting people, cholera, dengue, malaria. And so our interventions are also focused on critical water and sanitation support, as well as health support to help prevent disease in these areas that are coping with standing water.
And about how many people will that actually help?
So we're still very much in the phase of trying to get assistance to those that need it most. There are upwards of 33 million people that are displaced. This assistance will reach tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, but certainly not the 33 million that are desperately in need of assistance. And we've been pleased to see, even from the government of Pakistan, cash assistance, well over $100 million going out through their social protection system. But we're also calling on other donors to come in and support the humanitarian response and early recovery and longer-term reconstruction needs in Pakistan.
Switching now to the effects of the war in Ukraine, Sarah, it's made the global food shortage much worse. But when we talk about a shortage, what does that actually mean in terms of the number of people impacted by it?
So we could really see this year, we were already facing a global food security crisis driven by supply chain disruptions as a result of COVID, the lingering effects of COVID, spikes in prices because, again, those lingering effects of COVID and the kind of climate shocks that we're seeing in Pakistan right now, as well as drought in places like the Horn. But the war in Ukraine has been an absolute accelerant on that already very dire food security situation. Ukraine has historically been the breadbasket, not just of Europe, but has fed the world, and in particular fed the Middle East and sub-Saharan Africa, places that were already food insecure, a critical supplier of wheat and other corn, vegetable oil to places like the Horn of Africa, West Africa, and the Middle East. And so what we've seen as Ukrainian wheat has come off the market is both shortages in critical places, but also spikes in prices as commodity traders and others anticipate longer-term shortages. We've been very involved and are supportive of efforts to get Ukrainian wheat out of Ukraine, a Black Sea port deal that is facilitating commercial traffic as well as humanitarian traffic out of Black Sea ports to get what grain has been harvested out of Ukraine. We've also been supporting inside of Ukraine efforts to produce agriculture in the future, but it's clearly not yet enough.
And Sarah, you just mentioned the Sub-Saharan Africa and how that's being impacted by the global food crisis. You were there in July. What did you see?
I traveled to both Somalia and northern Kenya. Northern Kenya is an area that I actually began my career in, and I could rattle off numbers. We're seeing 20 million people at risk of starvation. That number could spike to 26 million in the next couple of months as we face not just a record fourth failed rainy season in the Horn of Africa, but now increasing likelihood of a fifth failed rainy season that's driving displacement and deprivation across Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia. In Kenya, we met with pastoralist individuals that had previously had hundreds of goats and cows that sustained them, their families, their communities, now have herds of 2, 3, 4 animals, in some cases no animals. And the knock-on effects of this are extreme. So individuals, again, that are faced with no source of livelihood, no source of sustenance, the animals being critical to not just meat production, not just income, but also critical milk for children. We visited and saw severely malnourished children because their parents have no means of livelihoods, and at the same time, the price of wheat, as we just discussed, the price of corn, the price of critical staples in Kenya has gone through the roof. And we see the same in Somalia and Ethiopia as well.
All right, Sarah, well, we appreciate your work around the world, and thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.